The gleaming black sedan sat in our driveway like a promise fulfilled. After 3 years of working double shifts at the warehouse and saving every penny, I'd finally done it. At 24, Marcus Chen had bought his first brand new car, a Honda Accord with that intoxicating new car smell and 0 miles on the odometer. I ran my fingers along the pristine hood, feeling the smooth paint beneath my calloused hands. This wasn't just transportation, it was proof that all those late nights, all those skipped meals, all those times I'd chosen work over hanging out with friends had meant something. The car represented independence, achievement, and most importantly, respect. "Marcus!" Mom's voice carried across the driveway. "Come inside for dinner." I took one last look at my sedan before heading into the house, keys jingling in my pocket like a victory song. The family dinner started normally enough. Dad asked about work, Mom fussed over whether I was eating enough vegetables, and my younger sister Stephanie scrolled through her phone with practiced indifference. At 19, Stephanie had perfected the art of being simultaneously present and completely disengaged. "So," Dad said, cutting into his meatloaf, "Stephanie's got some exciting news." I looked up, mildly curious. Stephanie rarely had news that didn't involve drama, failed classes, or requests for money. "I got accepted to state," she announced, finally looking up from her screen. "Full ride scholarship." "That's actually really great, Steph," I said, genuinely surprised. My sister had always been smart, but her grades had been inconsistent at best. "There's just one tiny problem," Mom interjected, her voice taking on that careful tone she used when she was about to ask for something big. "The scholarship covers tuition and housing, but she'll need reliable transportation to get back and forth, especially for her internship program." My stomach began to sink. "We were thinking," Dad continued, "since you work from home now with your promotion, maybe Stephanie could borrow your car? Just for the semester. You know how proud we are of her for turning things around." The room fell silent, except for the gentle clink of silverware. I stared at my parents, trying to process what they'd just suggested. "You want me to give Stephanie my car?" I asked slowly. "Not give," Mom said quickly. "Lend." Just temporarily. It would mean so much to the family, Marcus. You know how important education is. I looked at my sister, who was now watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What happened to the car fund Dad set up for you when you turned 16? Stephanie had the decency to look embarrassed. "I spent it on other things." "What things?" "Concert tickets, clothes, that trip to Miami with Jessica." She trailed off. The same sister who'd wasted her car fund, who'd crashed Dad's truck last year and never paid for the repairs, who'd borrowed my bike in high school and left it to rust in someone's yard. The same sister my parents had consistently chosen over me whenever there was a choice to be made. "I need my car, Mom. I worked 3 years to afford it." "Marcus," Dad's voice took on that disappointed tone I knew so well. "Family helps family. Besides, it's not like you're using it much since you work from home." "That's not the point." "The point," Mom interrupted, "is that Stephanie has a real opportunity here, and we should all support her. You'll get the car back in a few months." The familiar weight of being the family's backup plan settled on my shoulders. Marcus will understand. Marcus doesn't mind. Marcus can wait. I'd been hearing variations of these phrases my entire life. I watched my sister smile that triumphant little smile she'd perfected as a child, the one that said she'd gotten her way again. Something cold and calculating began to form in my chest. "You know what?" I said, forcing a smile. "You're right. Family should help family." My parents beamed. Stephanie actually looked surprised, as if she'd expected more of a fight. "Really?" Mom asked. "Really. In fact, I think Stephanie deserves a car of her own. a graduation present from her big brother. The confusion on their faces was almost comical. "Marcus, that's incredibly generous," Dad said, "but you don't need to." "I insist," I said, standing up from the table. "Let me get the paperwork sorted out. Stephanie, you can pick up the keys tomorrow." I left them sitting there, stunned by my unexpected generosity, and went to my room. Once the door was closed, I pulled out my laptop and began researching. If they wanted to play favorites, I'd give them exactly what they were asking for. The next morning, I drove to the DMV with a folder full of documents. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Janet, reviewed my paperwork with professional efficiency. "So you want to transfer ownership of the vehicle to—" She squinted at the form. "Stephanie Chen." "Your sister?" "That's right." "A graduation gift." "Sweet of you," she said, stamping the papers. "She's lucky to have a brother like you." If only she knew. The second part of my plan required a visit to my friend Trevor, who worked at a repo company downtown. Trevor and I had gone to high school together, and I'd helped him get his job when times were tough. "You want me to do what?" Trevor asked, nearly choking on his coffee. "Repo the Honda. It's perfectly legal. I'm about to sell the debt to you for $1. Trevor studied the paperwork I'd brought. "This is creative and completely legal. But Marcus, are you sure about this? It's your family." "They made their choice," I said. "I'm just making sure they live with the consequences." Trevor shrugged. "Your call, man. When do you want us to move?" "Give it 2 weeks. Let them get comfortable first. The next 2 weeks were almost entertaining. Stephanie drove my former car to school every day, posting Instagram stories from behind the wheel. Mom called constantly to thank me for being such a good brother. And Dad actually hugged me for the first time in months. "I'm proud of you, son," he said. "This is what family is about." I smiled and nodded, counting down the days. On a Tuesday morning, I got the text from Trevor. "Package delivered." I waited exactly 1 hour before driving to my parents' house. I found them standing in the driveway, staring at the empty space where the Honda had been parked. Stephanie was crying, actual tears, not her usual dramatic sniffling. "Marcus!" Mom rushed toward me as I got out of my beat-up old Corolla. "Someone stole the car. We need to call the police." "Already did," Dad said grimly, phone in hand. "This is a nice neighborhood." "I can't believe someone would—" "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "I can explain what happened." They turned to me expectantly. The car was repossessed. Legally repossessed. The silence stretched like a taut wire. "What do you mean, repossessed?" Dad asked slowly. I showed them my phone screen, the repo company's receipt. I sold the debt on the vehicle to Tri-County Recovery Services, since Stephanie defaulted on the payments. "What payments?" Stephanie shrieked. "You said it was a gift." "I gave you the car," I said calmly. "I never said anything about the payments being taken care of. You've owned the vehicle for 2 weeks. The payment was due yesterday. Since you didn't pay, the car was legally repossessed." The color drained from Mom's face. "Marcus, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. Here's the bill of sale, the payment schedule, and the default notice. All perfectly legal." Dad snatched the papers from my hand, scanning them with growing horror. "This says she owes $37,000? Plus interest and repo fees," I confirmed, "though I'm sure we can work out a payment plan." Stephanie was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "You did this on purpose." "I did exactly what you asked," I replied. "You wanted my car, you got it. You just didn't consider the responsibilities that come with ownership." "Get it back," Mom demanded. "Fix this right now." I shook my head. "I can't. I sold the debt. It's out of my hands now." That was a lie, of course. Trevor was holding the car at his lot, waiting for my call. But they didn't need to know that. "You're being vindictive," Dad accused. "This isn't like you." "Isn't it?" I asked. "When have you ever really paid attention to what I'm like?" When I was 7 and Stephanie broke my Game Boy, who had to go without Christmas presents so she could get a new one? When I was 16 and working nights to save for a car, who got Dad's old truck handed to them for free? When I graduated high school with honors, who got the family celebration dinner? They were all staring at me now. Every single time, it was Stephanie. Every choice, every opportunity, every moment when you had to pick between your children, you chose her. And when you asked for my car, the one thing I'd worked for and earned myself, you didn't even consider that I might say no. You just assumed Marcus would understand. Marcus always understands. "Son," Dad started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." "You want to know what I understand?" "I understand that you never saw me as anything more than Stephanie's backup plan, the reliable one, the one who doesn't need attention or support or consideration because he'll just figure it out on his own." Stephanie was still crying, but quietly now. "Marcus, I'm sorry, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I cut her off. "None of you did. It was easier to take me for granted." "How much?" Mom asked suddenly. "How much to get the car back?" I pretended to check my phone, though I already knew the answer. $37,000 for the principal, plus a $2,000 repo fee, plus interest. Call it $40,000, round numbers. Dad's face went gray. "We don't have that kind of money." "Then I guess Stephanie will need to find another way to get to school," I said. "Maybe she can take the bus." Character building. I turned to walk back to my car, but Mom grabbed my arm. "Please," she said, and for the first time in years, I heard genuine desperation in her voice. "She'll lose her scholarship, everything she's worked for." "Everything she's worked for?" I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. "What has she worked for, Mom?" "Really?" "She partied through high school, blew her car fund, and then got lucky with a scholarship. Meanwhile, I've been working since I was 16, paying for my own everything and never asking for help. But somehow her needs always come first." "That's not fair," Stephanie whispered. "Fair?" I stared at her. "You think any of this has been fair? You crashed Dad's truck, and he just shrugged it off. I got a parking ticket once and had to listen to a lecture about responsibility. You failed 3 classes junior year and got a tutor. I had to work through pneumonia to keep my perfect attendance record for the scholarship I didn't get. You spent your car fund on concert tickets, and somehow that becomes my problem to solve." The weight of years of resentment was pouring out now, and I couldn't stop it. "You want to know what's not fair?" What's not fair is that I'm 24 years old, and this is the first time in my life that any of you are actually listening to what I have to say. Mom was crying now too. "Marcus, we love you. We've always loved you." "No," I said quietly. "You've always counted on me." "There's a difference." Dad stepped forward, his face hard. "Enough. This is cruel and petty, and it's not the son I raised." "You're right," I agreed. "The son you raised would have handed over his keys without complaint, worked extra shifts to help pay for Stephanie's insurance, and probably thrown in gas money too. But that son finally got tired of being taken for granted." I looked at each of them, my parents with their shocked faces, my sister with her mascara-streaked cheeks, and felt something I'd never experienced before: power. For once in my life, I held all the cards. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "Stephanie is going to get a job. A real job, not babysitting for family friends. She's going to pay her own way for once in her life. And maybe, just maybe, she'll learn what it's like to work for something." The scholarship, Mom started. The scholarship covers tuition and housing. She can take the bus, or she can buy her own car with her own money, like I did. I got in my old Corolla and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see them standing there in the driveway, looking lost and confused. As I drove away, my phone started ringing. Mom first, then Dad, then Stephanie. I let them all go to voicemail. The euphoria lasted about 3 hours. By evening, the reality of what I'd done was settling in like a lead weight in my stomach. I sat in my apartment, listening to increasingly frantic voicemails from my family, and began to question everything. Had I gone too far? Stephanie might lose her scholarship. My parents looked genuinely devastated. Maybe I was just as petty and cruel as Dad had said. The doubt gnawed at me all night. By morning, I was exhausted and second-guessing every decision I'd made. Maybe there had been another way to handle this. Maybe I should have just talked to them instead of orchestrating this elaborate revenge plot. I was reaching for my phone to call Trevor when someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find my Uncle David, Dad's younger brother, standing in the hallway with 2 cups of coffee and a knowing smile. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. "I think we need to talk." Uncle David had always been the family outsider, the brother who'd moved across the country, started his own business, and only came back for holidays. I liked him, but we'd never been particularly close. "Your dad called me last night," he said, settling onto my couch. "Told me what happened, asked me to talk some sense into you." I groaned. "Look, Uncle David, I know how this looks." "Like you finally stood up for yourself?" he interrupted. "Yeah, it looks exactly like that." I blinked. "What?" "Marcus, I've been watching this family dynamic for 24 years. I've seen how your parents treat you versus how they treat Stephanie. I've bitten my tongue more times than I can count." He took a sip of coffee and leaned back. "When your dad called last night, crying about how you'd betrayed the family, I finally told him what I really thought. Want to know what I said?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. I said it was about damn time. The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. Someone understood. Someone had been watching, had seen what I'd seen, had recognized the unfairness I'd lived with my entire life. "But," Uncle David continued, "I also think you might have overshot the target a little." "What do you mean?" "I mean, your point is made. They get it now. The question is, what do you want the endgame to be? Do you want to destroy your sister's future to prove a point, or do you want to fix your family?" I stared into my coffee cup. "I don't know if it can be fixed." "Maybe not completely," he admitted, "but relationships are like bones. Sometimes they heal stronger after a break." We sat in silence for a while. Finally, Uncle David stood up. "Whatever you decide, make sure it's what you can live with long term. Revenge feels good in the moment, but you have to sleep with the consequences forever." After he left, I sat alone in my apartment for hours, thinking about what he'd said. What did I really want? Did I want Stephanie to lose her scholarship? Did I want my parents to suffer? Or did I just want them to see me, really see me, for who I was? By evening, I'd made my decision. I called Trevor first. "I want the car back." "You sure?" he asked. "Your sister's been calling all day, crying. It's actually pretty heartbreaking." "I'm sure. But I want to handle the return personally." "Your show, man." Next, I called my parents and asked them to meet me at their house. All of them. When I arrived, they were waiting in the living room like defendants in a courtroom. Stephanie's eyes were red and swollen. Mom looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Dad just looked tired. "I've been thinking about what happened," I began, "and I realize I may have been excessive." Hope flickered in their eyes. "But," I continued, "I want to make sure we're all clear on something." This isn't me apologizing for standing up for myself. This is me choosing to be the bigger person. I pulled out a sheet of paper, a contract I'd written up that afternoon. Stephanie, your car will be returned tomorrow morning. However, there are conditions. She nodded eagerly. First, you're going to get a part-time job and pay me $200 a month until you graduate. Not for the car, that's yours. But for the insurance, maintenance, and gas money I would have had to spend if I'd kept it. That's fair, she said quickly. Second, you're going to write me a letter. Not an apology. I don't want an apology. I want you to write down what you've learned from this experience. What you understand now that you didn't understand before. She nodded again. Third, I turned to my parents. We're all going to family counseling. Once a month for 6 months, I'll pay for it. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. Marcus, Dad said slowly, I'm not sure we need it, I said firmly. Because if we don't address the patterns that led to this situation, nothing changes. I go back to being taken for granted. Stephanie goes back to being spoiled, and we all pretend everything's fine until the next crisis. And if we agree to all this, Mom asked, then we try to be a real family. One where everyone's needs matter, not just the squeaky wheels. The room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Dad spoke. You really felt that overlooked? That unimportant? The pain in his voice was genuine, and I felt my anger soften slightly. Dad, when I was 8 and Stephanie broke my toy robot, you made me share my new one with her because big brothers should be generous. When I was 15 and saved up to buy a guitar, you convinced me to lend it to Stephanie for her school talent show. She left it at a friend's house and it got stolen. You said these things happen and bought her a new one, a better one than mine had been. Dad's face was stricken. I remember the guitar. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, we went to dinner at Applebee's. When Stephanie passed her driver's test on the 3rd try, we went to that fancy steakhouse downtown. Oh, Marcus, Mom whispered. I'm not trying to hurt anyone, I said. I just need you to understand that I've been keeping score my whole life, and the game hasn't been fair. Stephanie spoke up, her voice small. I never realized. How could you? I asked. You were getting what you wanted. Why would you question it? She was crying again, but these tears looked different. Less self-pity, more genuine remorse. I'll do it, she said. All of it. The job, the payments, the letter, the counseling, whatever it takes. Mom and Dad agreed too, though I could see it cost Dad something to admit he needed help understanding his own family. 3 months later, we had our first really honest family dinner in years. Stephanie was working at a local coffee shop, and while she complained about her early morning shifts, there was something different about her, more mature, more grounded. She'd written me a 5-page letter that I'd read and reread dozens of times. In it, she acknowledged not just her privilege, but her role in perpetuating the family dynamic that had made me feel invisible. The counseling sessions had been brutal at first. Dr. Martinez, our therapist, had a way of cutting through our family's carefully constructed myths and forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths. Dad had cried during the 3rd session when he realized how many of my achievements he'd minimized or overlooked entirely. Mom had her breakthrough during the 5th session when she admitted she'd always seen me as the easy child and had unconsciously put most of her parenting energy into managing Stephanie. But that wasn't fair to either of you, she'd said through tears. Marcus, I made you grow up too fast and carry too much responsibility. And Stephanie, I didn't prepare you for the real world because I was always fixing things for you. The car itself had become almost symbolic. Stephanie drove it to work and school, but she also maintained it meticulously and texted me photos whenever she filled up the gas tank or got an oil change. It was her way of showing respect for what the car represented, not just transportation, but the value of hard work and the importance of taking care of what you've been given. Our relationships weren't perfect, probably never would be, but they were real now in a way they'd never been before. When Stephanie called me for advice about her classes or her job, I could hear genuine respect in her voice. When my parents asked about my life, they actually listened to the answers instead of waiting for their turn to talk about Stephanie's latest drama. The most surprising change was in myself. The anger that had consumed me for so long had transformed into something more productive. I'd started advocating for myself in other areas of my life, asked for a raise at work, joined a recreational basketball league, even started dating someone who saw me as a priority rather than a convenience. 6 months after the car incident, as our family called it now, we were having Sunday dinner at my parents' house. It was Stephanie's turn to cook, and she'd made an elaborate spread despite having worked an opening shift that morning. "This is really good, Steph," I said, genuinely impressed by the homemade pasta she'd prepared. "Thanks," she beamed. "I've been watching YouTube videos. Figured if I'm going to be poor college student for the next few years, I better learn to cook something besides ramen." Dad laughed. "Remember when you tried to make cookies in high school and almost burned down the kitchen?" "Hey, that was a learning experience," she protested, but she was smiling. As we sat around the table, talking and laughing like a normal family, I caught Mom watching me with a soft expression. "What?" I asked. "I'm just proud of you," she said. "Not just for what you accomplished with the car situation, but for who you've become through all of this. You could have just written us off, but you chose to fight for the family instead." "It wasn't really a choice," I said. "You're stuck with me whether you like it or not." "We like it," Dad said quietly. "We like it very much." Later that evening, as I was getting ready to leave, Stephanie walked me to my car. "Marcus," she said, "I know I've said this before, but I really am sorry. Not just for the car thing, but for everything. For all the years I took your sacrifices for granted." "I know you are," I said, "and I forgive you. But more importantly, I'm proud of you for growing from this." She smiled, and for the first time in years, it wasn't the triumphant smile of someone who'd gotten their way. It was the genuine smile of someone who'd earned something valuable, self-respect, and the respect of her family. As I drove home in my old Corolla, I reflected on how strange life could be. I'd set out to teach my family a lesson about taking me for granted, but in the process, I'd learned something too. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to walk away from the people who've hurt you, but to refuse to accept less than you deserve from them. The black Honda was still in my parents' driveway, but it was Stephanie's now in every way that mattered. She'd earned it through months of hard work, responsibility, and genuine change. And I'd earned something too, a family that finally saw me as more than just a safety net. It had taken an elaborate revenge plot, several months of therapy, and more honest conversations than we'd had in decades, but we'd finally figured out what it meant to be a family where everyone mattered. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better.